So I put this mind map together because sensation perception was a topic where I felt like it was easy to memorize all these different things, but hard to sort of visualize all play interconnectedly together. So all the receptors, instructions, and pathways, so I built it all around one organizing idea that it's all doing the same job. They all flow out from sensory and perception, and then I got the basic principles is that it takes some form of physical energy from the world and turns into something the brain can use. So I started with the sensory and perception as a whole, and then moved down onto the basic principles. Of course, they apply across all the other senses, over hearing and chemical touch, vision. Um, the way I map sensory adaptation, which is the way you respond to constant stimulus fades. Like forgetting you have your shoes on or your clothes touching you, which saves you from sensory overload. And then I also laid out the perceptual process as a sequence. That stimulus catches your attention, hits your sensory receptors, transduction converts the physical energy into electrical impulses, transmission carries it to the brain, and finally coding organize and labels it. So the brain can, tell different sensations from each other. Putting that to online helped me sort of retain that information applies to all other aspects of sensation. And then the next branch I worked on was vision, and I feel like that's one of the ones where I had a bit more detail in the account of that. I feel like it's the most applicable since we're doing it so much. I traced the path of light coming through the cornea, where the rods and the cones transduce it and traveling along the optical nerve and crossing the optic chasm. And I split rods and cones into their own lines. Um, because the contrast between them is important. That rods are very sensitive to light, poor in detail, and cones in bright light but give us detail and color. And also noted that human eyes are tuned to a specific slice of the light spectrum, 400 nanometers at ultraviolet and then 700 infrared. And then there's some room for the other parts that make up vision, the cortical cells and the retinal cells, and then had a brief little footnote there for the disorders, which is just to acknowledge your blindness is just a function of any one of these little other components. And then I group the other perceptions together because once you understand the vision pathway and the basic principles, they sort of flow together. For hearing, I mapped out how sound is vibration, funneled by the outer ear to the eardrum, passed along by the middle ear ossities, the hammer and stirrup, and then transduced in the inner ear cochlea via the organ of Corti and the basilar membrane hair cells, and before heading up to the brainstem and the thalamus to the auditory cortex. I noted that the different parts of the membrane code different pitches, which is the same coding idea from basic principles shown up again. And for touch, I explained the mechanoreceptors, sorry, and what each one is for. Merkel for sustained pressure, SFO for touch, Rafani for stretch, CNI for deep pressure, etc. And then for chemical senses, I split gustation, and I listed the five basic tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, and olfaction, which is smell, and listed how the smell receptors connect to the olfactory bulb, connects to the amygdala and hippocampus, triggers memory, which I found very interesting. I thought that was important to note that smell can trigger memory powerfully on account of its connection to the amygdala and the hippocampus. And then also included the balance and position is run by the ear fluids. The last branch is the principle of perception, which I kept separate from sensation on purpose, because where the brain stops just receiving and starts interpreting things, mapped out the things that the ear focus on one thing, attention, and then recognition, identifying objects, which is important for visual and hearing. You can always identify familiar things. I structured this way because I wanted to work on the basic principles first and then work through the individual senses because they all run on the same underlying process. So separating that is important and it all sort of loops back to the map is just a way of me recording, finding the one pattern throughout all the different senses and perceptions.